The Hawkeyes face a old familiar face and a previous division rival, of course, in his second season at Illinois. And we will preview the Illini and the Hawkeyes here on the Voice of College Football. It's our 60-second edition of Iowa Hawkeyes Live. Welcome in. Leave those comments and questions there in the live chat for myself. And, of course, the guy that makes this show work, Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Hey, Corey.
Hey, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are
Good
you?
to hear. I'm hanging in there. Yeah. It's another week of hoping for some advancement on offense. And boy, you got a big game Saturday. Didn't mark this one on the calendar preseason. This was one of those games that you looked at and said, "Boy, that should be a win." But the way Illinois is playing right now, and Mark, I don't know about you, but I think you probably remember me saying that I had full confidence when Brett took that job over that he would get the job done. And I'm not saying he's gotten it done. I mean, beating, one win against a really odd state of a program in Wisconsin right now is not going to seal the deal. And certainly it's reflected. Lack of ticket sales has just absolutely baffled me. They've still got, I saw earlier today that like 20,000 seats still not accounted for this Saturday, which is just mind-boggling. But when you're not, selling season tickets, I just don't understand how Rutgers can sell out based on a 3-0 start and Illinois can't. Just explain that to me, Mark. I don't really see a difference there.
How close is Champaign to Chicago?
Oh, probably 2 hours.
Okay. Population size. That would be my first response. Rutgers has a lot more people to draw from.
I guess so. Everybody always used to say that nobody cared about Rutgers football, and it was nice to see. Is it SHI Stadium? Is it She Stadium? What do they say?
SHI, I believe.
SHI.
That's what I was.
That it was cool to see that stadium packed, and honestly, I mean, as much as it probably is a disadvantage to Iowa, I'd like to see the stadium on Saturday night packed. And what's cool about it, Mark, and I really mean this, I know fans are frustrated with the offense. I published some content yesterday about the frustrations, but like it is neat to see Rutgers fans into the game. Now, I know a lot of them left by halftime, kind of like the Maryland game against Iowa last season, where it was really hyped up and it was a night game. And then, the game was over early. And that wasn't the case with Rutgers, but Iowa kind of pulled away. Same thing with this game on Saturday night. I think it'd be cool, even though this was perceived to be a mid-tier at best game. I mean, that's why it was scheduled as a night game. That's what you got to realize. It used to be the night games were the primetime games were the prime games in the Big Ten. But now with Fox wanting to dominate that noon slot, would you say that these are the Big Ten is typically adding games that are middle of the pack at night and then leaving the mid-afternoon games and the other 11 a.m. games on BTN to be the lower echelon games?
Well, certainly the games on BTN are typically the lower end games. However, I know that when I had a better understanding or just knew of what the pecking order exactly was past Fox and ABC/ESPN, that on the Big Ten Network, I know that every school in the Big Ten will make at least one appearance on BTN. That's one guideline rule. And then the other one, they have some priority at some point to get some decent games. So they're not always picking from the bottom all the time. So you do see, for example, the game preceding Iowa-Illinois is a pretty decent matchup with Purdue and Maryland on BTN as well. So it's not like they always select last. There's some type of formula there that requires them to get some decent selections.
Well, of course, the Rutgers game, Iowa-Rutgers, was on FS1. But again, it was that later time slot. So I don't really care, frankly. I actually like night games. There's something cool about it. And I know fans think this is a diluted version of what used to be an awesome time slot. And I get it. You're not on ABC. You don't have Brent Musburger and Kirk Herbstreit calling your game. You're not a big Brent Musburger fan, are you, Mark? Did you like him back in the day?
Well,
I just thought you were giving.
Why did you jump to that conclusion?
I thought you were giving me a smirk when I said his name. Do you like Musburger?
I do like Brent Musburger.
Is he even doing anything now? Is he on SEC Network?
He's doing radio for the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm almost positive.
Really? Well, they relegated him to the SEC network for a while, correct? After his stint on Saturday Night Football.
Yeah, I believe that was his last stop with ESPN
Yeah.
slash
So,
ABC.
anyways, I mean, I just remember, even 10 years ago, those games at night on ABC were just awesome. I'm not saying they still aren't. It's been a while since Iowa's had a night game on ABC. I'm trying to think of the last time they did. Partly because of the Fox deal. Fox has now. Why was explain to me? See, who hasn't Ohio State played on ABC at night this year?
Wisconsin, and I guess that would be the one. Yes, the Wisconsin game. Notre Dame as well. So they've played 2 of the prime time out of 5 weeks.
But the Wisconsin game, why was that at night? Was there a better Big Ten game on at noon?
That would have been the week of Michigan, Maryland. Was that?
Oh, that's right. That's kind of an odd.
That week. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that Fox doesn't get all the number 1 selections.
Okay.
They alternate.
But that won't be the case moving forward, correct?
I don't know. I don't know what the formula is going to be moving forward. But I know
sure
that Ohio State Notre Dame was the second selection of the entire season to Ohio State Michigan. So Fox selected Ohio State Michigan, ABC countered with Ohio State Notre Dame, and then I don't know where it went from there.
Okay. Well, anyways, TV manipulates all this stuff, but I still think it's cool to have a night game. I want Illinois to be good. I know Iowa fans think it's not good for the Hawks. I get that because somebody's got to be bad. I understand that not everybody can be good. Right now, it looks like the worst team in the division is Northwestern, hands down, which is pretty pathetic when you look at the fact that Nebraska just fired their head coach and Wisconsin just fired their head coach. I don't know how long Pat Fitzgerald has. Frankly, they just announced this. You see this stadium that they have, that they released plans for?
Yes.
Mark, that place is insane. I don't know how they can't fill up the place they have now.
No.
How are they going to fill up that place? I mean, I don't know.
Going 3-9.
I was going to say the product on the field's got to be better. I'm serious. They may. I don't know. I don't know what the future. This is a really weird time period.
He has been there so long, Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern, and he's been so successful, relatively successful, based on what Northwestern expects. And he is such a favored son that all those things have come together for so long, now 17 years, that if he was let go, I don't even know how to necessarily rate that job or what type of coach they could expect to get there.
Well, so we always equate, at least that's my perception, is we equate programs like Northwestern and Vanderbilt. But can we compare for a second the, I don't know what the facilities are like at Vanderbilt. Are they anywhere close to what Northwestern has?
I don't believe so. Not based on these upgrades.
Yeah,
No,
I mean, I don't really know. What makes Northwestern? I don't want to say they've never been a bad job because they're in the Big Ten, but like, what makes them any worse of a job than Minnesota nowadays? With everything they've done and they're going to do with facilities and the money coming into this conference, what makes them worse? Just their academic requirements? Is that what separates them from being able to compete on the recruiting trails?
So to your point, what's been accomplished at Northwestern is at least as good as what's been accomplished at Minnesota in the last 20 to 25 years. So that's your point, and I agree with it. There's really nothing other than the argument that it's more difficult to win at Northwestern because of the academic requirements, but that hasn't necessarily played out that way.
Yeah, and that's true. And so I that's obviously probably the one. I mean, I would not expect Northwestern to fire Pat Fitzgerald, mid-season like Wisconsin just did, because Wisconsin actually, has somewhat of a fair recruiting basis, if you will, whereas Northwestern's disadvantaged. But again, with all those facilities, I would think of the schools that have those extra requirements for its athletes from an education standpoint, academic standpoint. I would expect Northwestern to be able to have some flexibility with the future. I just don't know how many more bad seasons can Northwestern have, and I know we're kind of going off the rails here talking about the different teams in the West, but this is just a weird. I didn't, Mark, I didn't expect this type of a year. Did you in the West? Just very
Well, not just
strange.
in the
Just
West, in college football, had somebody served up all those firings? We've had five now. We've got five through 5 weeks of play in college football, in major college football, Power Five coaches.
so in
And
Wisconsin, Nebraska, Georgia Tech, Colorado, and Arizona State.
Arizona State.
Okay.
So none of those would have surprised me, except Paul Chryst at Wisconsin. Because if he would have told me 5 weeks ago, Paul Chryst is going to be fired after week 5, I would have thought, what was the scandal? what came
Yeah.
out?
And I even made that comment to you when I talked to you on the phone Sunday. I said, there's got to be something else going on here. You know, even though you don't look at Paul Chryst and think he's a guy who's going to have any off-field issues, but by all accounts, you know, I listened to the press conference from Chris McIntosh and is it McIntosh, I think, the AD there, and Jim Leonard. It doesn't sound like that this was for any reason other than direction of the program. They felt like the direction of the program had changed and they made a change. Now, it's easier for, I talked to you on Sunday night too about this. It's easier for a program like Wisconsin to make that move when you recognize not only do we have a coach who's getting up there in years, probably doesn't have a ton of years left. I don't know how long Paul Chryst planned on coaching, but you also have a guy as your DC who's one of the hottest candidates in the country for head coaching jobs anyways at this level. You know, that's the other difference. Even if somebody wanted to say that Kirk Ferentz should be fired, and I've never said that, and I'm not close to that point at all. I don't think you could be given his recent track record, although Wisconsin might argue that. But even if you wanted to make that claim, you really can't because Iowa does not have a Jim Leonard in waiting. You know, like I guess if you knew that Bob Stoops would take the job, but Bob Stoops is not, you know, Bob Stoops ain't got many years left, even if he were to take a head coaching job this late in his career. Jim Leonard, I mean, you could argue that that's the future of Wisconsin football. Now they are taking a chance because we don't know if Jim Leonard can be a successful head coach at this level. I think we assume he can, and most programs would love to have Jim Leonard. But I think this is just kind of speeding up the process for Wisconsin of what they envisioned and securing a guy in Jim Leonard. Because look, if you wait 2 years and Paul Chryst calls it quits, and regardless if you were able to sustain 8 to 9 wins a year, maybe Jim Leonard's at Nebraska or, you know, Arizona State or somewhere else, and all of a sudden you're out there with a full-blown coaching search. And I know Chris McIntosh says, well, we're going to go on a full search. What else is he going to say? When he's asked that question, he's not going to say, no, it's Jim's job. I mean, like this is the whole reason they did this during the season, is to see what can Jim do during the rest of the season. If there's any signs of upward trending, I believe that he's the man.
Yeah, it's the safe way to play it. So I'm curious, and we'll never know, but if Paul Chryst had no designs in retiring, the man's only 56 years old. He could coach for another 10 to 15 years. Who knows?
I didn't realize he was only 56, Mark.
Pardon me?
I didn't realize he was only 56.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So 56 years old, the likelihood that he's going to upgrade his status within the coaching ranks from Wisconsin is almost nil. So he had reached basically the top of college football. And if he just continued to move along at 10-3, let's say, most seasons, well, were they going to fire him thinking that they still wanted Jim Leonard? So they were looking for this opportunity to have any type of downgrade in performance. And then, like you say, that was exactly my thought, that they have the opportunity now in firing Chryst earlier, inserting Leonard, that their hopes are, I believe, to continue with Jim Leonard. But if for whatever reason they don't feel as though he performs in these final 7 games of the season, then they can still go look.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation, and I know Paul Chryst is very respected. I know Don Patterson has had to talk to him since that news broke, and he feels bad for Paul Chryst. I know Kirk Ferentz feels bad for Paul Chryst. I mean, I do. I feel bad for the guy. But I mean, it doesn't mean anything for Iowa. I mean, Iowa's, again, they're not in that situation. I know some fans have equated it to that, and even I brought it up yesterday on my channel. that it's too bad that Iowa doesn't have a similar attitude as it relates to coaching changes. Now, Kirk Ferentz was asked, and he probably shouldn't be the one to be asked this during the season, but he was asked today during his weekly press conference, would you ever consider a in-season coaching change, staff change? And I got a little bit like Kirk's response to me. You can tell when you watch Kirk over the years talk to the media, you can tell when he gets a bit uncomfortable or maybe even a bit defensive in his voice. And you could tell that question made him uncomfortable. And he basically, I think it was Scott Docterman that asked him the question, and he basically said back, for what reason? And Scott said, well, for any reason. And then, then he expounded and said, yeah, well, if we felt the need to, but I've never been in that situation. I've never been in that position. So again, if Brian, if Brian was anybody else but Brian, you could not allow. I don't even think at Iowa you'd allow this, right? I just don't think you would allow this type of. It's got to be either the head coach or the OC, and you're not going to fire Kirk Ferentz. So if this was anybody other than Brian Ferentz, he would be gone. He wouldn't be here still.
Yeah, he's been the offensive coordinator since what year?
2017.
Okay, we're looking at a 6th season as the offensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would think for a program that generally finishes in the top 15 to 20 in the country, and they're being held back by an offense that's as deplorable as this one, yeah, this would have come. I don't know that we could go to. I am going to guarantee, although I can't back it up, that there is no example in college football history that you take a top 15 program in the country and then show where one side of the football is this anemic and the coordinators retained for 6 years. No.
Yeah, and I was trying to find. Okay, so we've went over these numbers in the past, but if we're just looking at total offense, which I understand is not the perfect way to gauge an offense, but it is a metric that I think is, if you're just looking at a singular metric, it's probably the best metric out there. So 2017, they were 117, then 92, then 99, 88, 124. So they've basically, it's not like those numbers would suggest it's been a linear move down, but I mean, it's been bad every year, right? I mean, those are all bad numbers every single year. And you can say, well, he didn't inherit much with Greg Davis. Well, Greg Davis's last year was 2016, and they were 121st in total offense, which was terrible then. But Greg Davis did put up, in 2014, they were the 66th best offense, which is not good, but at least it's close to average. And then in 2015, they were 72nd. But my point is, Brian hasn't sniffed that. 2020, they were 88. So if you throw out the COVID year, which I know you can't really do, to be fair to him, you have to count that. But if you don't want to count that, he hasn't had a top 90 offense. And, they were 124 last year. And Mark, how much can they recover? We're already 5 games in. As far as the total offense and its ranking, how much movement up can you achieve now? I don't think very much.
Yeah, we're 40% through the season, roughly.
Yeah, I think you're looking at, no matter what they do the rest of the way, likely to be 110 plus, even if they make some significant improvements.
It's not statistically too feasible,
So,
especially considering you've already played the 3 worst opponents on the schedule, unless Northwestern's in that mix, but 3 of the 4 worst opponents have already been played.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry. This Ohio State game's coming up when? The 15th? It's only like 2 weeks away, right?
No, it's the 22nd.
Oh, okay. Regardless, it's coming up, and I didn't realize that Ohio State's a top 10 ranked defense after 5 games.
Well, and some people, the reason that this is a relevant subject is because some people have suggested in response to the Christ news that why don't they fire Brian and promote John Budmeyer to be the offensive coordinator in the meantime? I don't really know if that makes a difference here at Iowa. And John Budmeyer, he's not the Jim Leonard of the offense. Like, he's not proven himself to some great extent. He was Paul Chryst' quarterback's coach. He was the OC for 1 year at Colorado State, a year they were not very good. And what has he done this year that's inspired confidence, Mark? He's getting paid like $16,000 a week. to, I guess, help with the offense because he's not supposed to technically be coaching the quarterbacks. I don't know if those I think there's ways around those technicalities. I don't know that for certain, but my point is, what difference have you seen on the field, Mark, at the quarterback position? And wouldn't you think that'd be the position he'd be helping with, given his, his trademark as a QB's guru? So I don't really think he's the answer. So I don't really think you probably make a change mid-season because I don't really know that it does anything. For Iowa, it doesn't do anything.
I saw the first positive signs out of this offense, true positive signs against Michigan on about 3 drives. They had a couple 75-plus yard drives and a few 40, 45-yard drives.
But again, Mark, I'm not trying to I know this is going to sound like I'm just being negative, but the game was basically out of reach at that point. And, let's see Iowa play with you can't evaluate an offense when a defense can sit back in a zone and, allow. I mean, this is what Iowa does to opponents. Like I bring up the Michigan game, they did it actually. I know they gave up the early touchdown, but they gave up, I don't know what the total yardage was in that first half, but boy, Michigan ran the ball effectively, but Iowa still was only down. What were they down? 13-0 at halftime. I mean, given the yardage, you would expect more. So Iowa bends and doesn't break. 2017 against Penn State was a perfect example of that. I'm just saying, until I see Iowa perform like that under pressure, when a defense is actually being aggressive and playing like they did to start, I'm not convinced that there's much upward motion. And I'd like to believe there is. Believe me, I don't want to believe that this offense is stuck in mud, so to speak. But you are actually impressed given the circumstances in the second half by Iowa's offense?
Impressed, relatively speaking. I'm being impressed compared to what the standard has been. No, I would not be impressed with an offense that scored 0 in the first half and scored 2 touchdowns in the second half, and 1 was obviously in garbage time. When did they even score the final I didn't even see the final touchdown. So this was my viewing situation on Saturday. Was at 20-0. I'm like, I'm gone. Okay, I'm out of here, and I'll just watch the score, and I'll see when the score pops up. And if Iowa, which I didn't anticipate, has any life in it, then I can always flip back. Well, I flipped back at 20-7 during the ill-fated drive, and then the 4th and 2 missed conversion inside the 5-yard line. And then I watched a little bit after that. I saw Michigan score to make it 27-7, and there was only like 3 minutes left, something in that range at that point. So I was a little surprised to see that Iowa scored a meaningless touchdown. The last 2 touchdowns, one each side, were what I would consider to be meaningless touchdowns. But
so even if we're counting the touchdown at the beginning of the fourth quarter, it was 20-0 heading into the fourth, and before the last touchdown, which occurred with like 10 seconds left in the game. So it's completely 7 points, Mark. That's all I'm saying. I mean, I understand what you're saying. You're going to see improvement from nothing. I mean, there's nowhere to go but up, right? And so I understand what you're saying, and I see some. Rick has brought it up several times. Stay positive. I've said a million. The defense and special teams unit was really good. Now the defense is not going to be able to play perfect. And Michigan's too electric of an offense. Their offensive line is too good. Blake Corum's too good. You're not going to be able to hold those guys down completely. You can't expect to be able to win a bunch of 7-3 type games. So, yeah, I mean, it's there. Unfortunately, right now you are what you are, even with this elite offense and special teams unit. That's a good question from Cole. I think it's a good question, actually, Mark.
Thank you, Cole. Appreciate the contribution here. Nebraska fan Cole says, what's a better job, Nebraska or Wisconsin? Honest. Cole asked me this question. We'll serve this up for Corey. Cole asked me this when we went live after the Paul Christ firing on Sunday. And so I let Cole know where I stand.
I think that's such a hard question to answer. I would probably give a political response and say it depends on how you're evaluating a better job. I think the ceiling is much higher for Wisconsin, given the stability that program has had for so many years now. But
do you consider that ceiling or floor?
Or excuse me, I'm sorry, floor. The floor is much higher at Wisconsin than it is at Nebraska, given the stability. But But Nebraska, I mean, I don't know that there's a program in the Big Ten besides maybe Ohio State and Michigan, maybe Penn State, that has the fan support that Nebraska does. And I'm even including Iowa. I don't know, I mean, who has better fan support, Nebraska or Iowa. I think they're both tremendous. And I just look at what Nebraska's done, even though I've questioned the sellout streak. The fact that they're packing the stadium, they packed that stadium on Saturday night against Indiana. That was an insane crowd. They just fired their head coach. They're losing to teams. I give them credit, Mark, because it's incredible. So I don't know. I think they're both different. If you're talking about a guy like Matt Campbell, boy, that would be a litmus test for Matt Campbell. Is there a ceiling on the Iowa State program, or is there a ceiling on Matt Campbell? That'd be a good way to evaluate him as the head coach. If he ends up going there and they end up being 8-4, 9-3, then maybe Iowa State fans say, hey, we can actually do better. It's kind of the Kirk Ferentz effect at Iowa. I think I know a lot of Iowa fans are afraid of what comes after Kirk. And I get it. I understand that. And people love to bring up, guys from 70 years ago who were, 50, 60 years ago at Iowa. Well, we could always go back to the Bob Cummings days, or, I get that. But it's a long time ago, Mark, and eventually you got to face reality. There's going to be a post-Kirk era. There is, and it's going to be one or the other. And like Wisconsin basically said, I know Paul Chryst didn't build the immunity and the reputation that Kirk did and was not tenured there nearly as long as Kirk, but they were willing to jump into that pool headfirst now, as opposed to however many years down the road. So I don't know. I would be intrigued to see. Obviously, if you're Jim Leonhard, I think if you're offered that job, there's no way you jump ship to Nebraska. You're not going to turn down the head coaching job at Wisconsin because you think, maybe there's a little bit, higher ceiling at Nebraska. No, and he's built such a foundation there and has the support of such a huge part of that fan base. So I just think it depends on the person.
I think Nebraska has a higher ceiling, and therefore I think Nebraska is a better job. There's no comparison between them historically. And I don't know how much history and brand and name recognition has to do with 2022. I can't answer that question, but it has something to do with it. And there's no comparison between the two football brands historically. I also know that Nebraska has dived into the NIL collective full bore, and they've shown that, based on everything I hear, that they are going to be a major player there. I know nothing about Wisconsin's resources. Nebraska is breaking ground on new facilities that are going to be just as good, if not better, than what we've seen across the Big Ten. I don't know what Wisconsin's doing there. I don't pretend to know the status of their facilities, but I've never heard anything. So I guess that they are standard, that they're neither advantage or disadvantage. And so I would just think that as college football continues to be an arms race, that Nebraska seems more willing, more dedicated to playing by those rules. Although we get a pretty good indication that if Wisconsin's going to pony up what would have been $16 million, I guess it was negotiated back down to $11 million. That, hey, for a coach that's winning 9 and 10 games a year.
I mean, like, seriously, Paul Chryst doesn't have to work again. I mean, he can just, and maybe he will. And if he does, I wouldn't expect John Budmeyer to be at Iowa very long, because I wouldn't be surprised if Paul Chryst adds him back to his staff. But that's quite a lump sum of cash to pay out.
And unless Wisconsin would have gone 4-8, 5-7 this year, outside of the 5 or 10% of the delusional end of the fan base that would demand a firing, nobody was going to bat an eye if Wisconsin just marched into 2023 with Paul Chryst as the head coach. So it wasn't like there was pressure there to get rid of him.
Can I, before we get to more substance with Illinois this weekend, and certainly we'll do that, can I have you, I've got 2 comments from my YouTube channel that I want to share with you. I just want to get your thoughts on them, because these are interesting thoughts, and I respect the opinions, but I want to kind of demonstrate to you what the viewpoint of some in the Iowa fan base, because it seems to you, I know the people on here for the most part are wanting change and demanding change, but I just want to demonstrate to you why there still isn't change. Can I share these tweets up on the screen?
Of course.
So here's the first one. If you would, let me get rid of Cole's question here. I'll get rid of that too. All right.
So if not everyone can read along, we have a comment coming in from Dan Michaels, who states, Iowa's defense is good because of its offense. Running old-fashioned teams develop tougher defensive lines because of how they practice against each other. Flashy offensive teams seldom have good defenses for the fact that they practice different off the field. Ferentz knows this, and he knows this type of offense suits the personnel he has at his disposal. Military teams use the wishbone offense because of the types of players they have. There is nothing wrong with Iowa's offense because of it. They have a very good defense. Almost nobody blows Iowa out, and they can hang with all but the most elite teams, and even then they are competitive. They have a good coach and a good system. Okay.
Please give me your thoughts, Mark.
Well, there are no other examples of this, what he's talking about here.
I mean, to say there's nothing, I mean, let's just take a couple of these excerpts. There is nothing wrong with, I'm not trying to rip Dan. I appreciate him interacting, and I'm just trying to hear a different opinion here. But to say there is nothing wrong with Iowa's offense, I don't understand. How I'm just shocked that an Iowa fan would say that. And I'd like to understand. Maybe I don't want to.
We've discussed in the past, and I think we're on the same page, that we don't expect an elite offense at Iowa.
No.
Every successful program has an identity. Iowa's identity, whether real or more perceived as the years go by, is somewhat close to what Wisconsin's is. Run the football, play great defense. And that's great, but the off unit, if you're a defense-oriented program, the off unit should be complementing, supporting the strength, the elite unit, not detracting from it, making it unbearably difficult to succeed because of it. I brought this up to you once in a while, Corey. When was the last time Iowa just won one game, a single game, because of its offense? They've won games where the defense has been exceptional, of course, and the offense has been horrible. And they've won a number of games where the defense has been exceptional and the offense just didn't get in the way, did its job to a certain extent. Some of those games in 2020 in particular, but didn't override an off day by the defense. The defense has just a marginally off day, they're done.
I would say the last example of that I can recall at the top of my head would be 2017 at Iowa State, a game that was 44-41 in overtime.
Yeah.
So that would be an example. But the USC blowout, the Ohio State blowout, the Maryland blowout last year, those were all sparked by pretty darn. I mean, Josh Jackson had 3 picks against Ohio State. Amani Hooker had a pick 6. That's 4 interceptions just off the top of my head. They had 7 turnovers. Iowa defense forced 7 turnovers against Maryland last year.
Yeah, those were complete efforts on both sides of the ball.
A.J. Epinesa knocked Keaton Slovis out of that game in the Holiday Bowl in 2019. So I get what you're saying. And I'm not ripping Dan, but to say Iowa's offense is good Iowa's defense is good because of his offense, to me is, a bit inflammatory towards Phil Parker's unit. They're overcoming a heck of a lot to do what they're doing.
Do we really want to go through the teams in the country, let's say over the past 5 years, that have had, and I'm not talking about elite units on either side of the ball, maybe in some cases an elite unit, but a very good one on the other side of the ball. We can go to all sorts of programs across the country that have not suffered from having an elite unit on one side of the football. Therefore, the way they practiced did not produce an elite or capable unit on the other side of the ball. You just played one on Saturday.
Right. Frankly, Illinois is doing that right now. And we're just 5 games in, but boy, they look pretty darn good on both sides, right? They're running the ball effectively. They're stopping the run. They've had games where they've held, I don't know, I looked back through every box score so far, and they've held opposing quarterbacks in check. The other comment that I wanted to share with you is from Well, that's really small. Why is that so small? Can you read that, Mark?
I can blow it up. There we go.
That's Bill Tharp, which again, appreciate Bill interacting, but just this is the perspective from some Iowa fans, Mark.
Dangerous talk. Anyone else remember when Iowa fired Tom Davis because the teams did not always go past the second round in the NCAA tournament? That was more than 30 years ago, and Iowa is still recovering. Iowa teams, more often than not, are in position to win the game, and that is much better than it could be. Iowa does not have large cities, much diversity, or a warm climate to make recruiting easy. Iowa is amazingly fortunate to have what we have, and that can be lost by getting greedy and unreasonable expectations. Iowa is not located on the Gulf Coast. Okay, this is somewhat related to what he just stated here. And I was about to bring this up when we were in the conversation of lack of development on the offensive side. It would be interesting to note, and this could be easily done. So we know that Iowa has taken good recruiting classes on the defensive side and far outproduced the recruiting ranking on the defensive side. So instead of just looking at Iowa's year-to-year class rankings, divide that offense and defense. So so if they're recruiting at the same level on both sides of the ball, then they're recruiting what, at like number 35 level generally in the country on the defensive side.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And they're developing those players into a unit based on individual development, strength and conditioning, scheme, in-game adjustments, game planning. All those things have turned a top 35 defense in terms of talent into top 5 and 10 units in the country. Well, on the other side, if the recruiting is just as effective from a talent standpoint in the evaluation, they're turning top 35 players on the offensive side into bottom 20 units in the country.
I can't argue with that. And I think Iowa's recruiting. I mean, Spencer Petras was at one time a low 4-star. I think he may have ended a low 4-star according to some rating systems. And they've had, I mean, the verdict is still out in some of these young offensive linemen, but they've had some offensive linemen that have were highly thought of on the recruiting trail. Even some, I mean, you think about offensive linemen, Iowa typically does pretty well developing these guys, but they have missed on some guys. Noah Fenske was a guy who transferred out, wasn't real highly touted. Ezra Miller left for Nebraska. Trying to think of the kid that was from Norwalk that, man, whose name escapes me, but he's on the roster now, and he was a 4-star recruit, I believe, and I didn't see the field at all. So that's a fair point. And it is amazing. I know the one weird thing about this offense, we're talking about not being developed, and yet the talent that this offense has produced at tight end and individual linemen in the league is incredible. That's why it's so baffling that they, and I don't mean, again, I'm not trying to just, as Rick said earlier, beat a dead horse, but I really I'm almost confounded. I am confounded by how we've gotten to this point with the offense, because just again, if you just think about those two positions, tight end and offensive line, even though the offensive line is rarely really good across the board, wouldn't you think that their elite development that they've proven at those two spots would not offset the underachieving at quarterback and at wide receiver, and you could argue at running back, but it would at least account for some of those shortcomings? I mean, wouldn't that tell you that we're so far under what we need to be doing developmental wise at those three positions? We're so far away that imagine if you had mediocre tight ends and you didn't know how to develop offensive linemen, where would the offense be then? That's what's kind of weird about this. I just can't believe that those two positions aren't accounting for more in the final results offensively. Does that make sense, Mark? Am I on the right track with that thought?
Yeah, well, that would mean that those two units, the offensive line and the tight ends, would be whatever's making those two groups succeed.
Yeah.
just the talent that they're able to acquire, the developing of the talent, and then it moving on. There has to be some kind of combination there. Yeah, if that didn't exist, then
what is making Iowa's tight ends? What makes Iowa even in the conversation for tight end? Who is it? What is it? Who is it? Because a lot of these guys are not highly touted. George Kittle was not a highly sought after recruit. Noah Fant really wasn't either. CJ Fedorowicz was a 4-star, I believe. But I mean, like, they're doing this, and they've done this over a course of many, many years. And this goes back into the Hayden era. But I mean, it can't just be the system. The system alone is not what's making these guys so NFL ready. Do you see what TJ Hawkinson did? Not to change the subject. Do you see what he did yesterday for the Lions?
no.
I think he had like 170 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, he just torched whoever they were playing. And that's with a pretty pedestrian. And I know Lions have scored quite a bit this year. But my point is, this is just, they just do it year after year. And I don't know who is that's doing that. Because they've had a lot of attrition as far as coaching. And right now you got a linebacker coaching, former linebacker, and Abdul Hodge coaching the tight ends.
It's a great question. Either it's either somebody has a diamond in the rough ability to find these guys, that they have a pretty good idea that they're going to outperform their recruiting ranking. But there has to be development there as well. And why that development and that ability to take. So you're telling me if we took all the great tight ends that have been produced at Iowa in the last 10 to 15 years, really few or none of them were super, super highly recruited, highly rated? I think we lost Corey. Hopefully he figures that out and comes back. So based on what I know, let's unfortunately, so this is an odd situation because I can't. Yes, maybe I can. There we go. For not only were you gone, but I thought we had an odd situation where whatever you posted on the screen, I would not be able to take down left, and it was like right over.
Sorry about that. Hopefully my internet's okay. Anyways, it went out.
So my point was, I guess point/question was, out of all these great tight ends, were any of them like super, super high 5-star or high 4 stars, highly touted?
Like I said, Fedorowicz would be the only guy who I remember being a 4-star. I'm probably wrong on that, being the only guy. Hawkinson was not highly thought of. Laporta was, and honestly, they've had some of those guys that they have, like Elijah Yelverton. I don't remember if he was 4-star down in Texas. He gave up football. Like, he didn't work out. So the guys that you'd expect to be, that were somewhat higher in the recruiting rankings are actually the ones that have not necessarily worked out. It is baffling. And
so to your point, I just think it's somebody needs to unearth how they are able to produce great NFL tight ends out of 3 stars.
And I give Kirk Ferentz a lot of credit for that, even though he's not a former tight end. He learned offensive line, which I get there's some carryover there, but he deserves credit for what he's done with developing individuals along the offensive line and his staff being able to do what they've done with the tight end position.
So we've got about 175 on the line. We appreciate everybody being here at Hawkeyes Live. We come your way every Tuesday at 4:30 Central Time. And why don't we do this? Bring somebody with you next week, and we can double the crowd. Bring some folks that love college football in Iowa in particular next Tuesday, 4:30 Central. And we're going to talk up the Illinois matchup. We got Alec Bussey on the line from Rivals. Alec, how are you?
Good, guys. How are you?
Doing just fine. Appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chop it up, even though I'm no longer able to watch the Illini every week. I've done a good job of sticking on with them.
Yeah, so you have moved on to covering the Wildcats of Kansas State and some Adrian Martinez.
I have, and guys, I'll newsflash to the Big Ten fans. This is not the same Adrian Martinez that was at Nebraska. He doesn't have an interception yet. He hasn't lost a fumble yet. Hasn't really cost Kansas State a game yet. I mean, maybe Adrian Martinez wasn't the problem at Nebraska. Maybe it was Scott Frost.
I never thought Adrian Martinez was the problem. Mark, did you think he was the problem?
Well, not when all these other problems were present
Yeah.
at Nebraska. No.
And I'll say this, Alec, you probably don't know this, but you're familiar with Iowa's struggles at the quarterback position, and it's interesting. Adrian Martinez is the one guy who I've been told by multiple sources that Iowa actually reached out to him during the offseason.
That is not on brand for Iowa.
No, well, it's not, but it should be. But they reached out to him, I guess, and obviously, Kansas State had an in with him, I believe, because of his girlfriend being there. But anyways, I digress. We can get to Illinois. Talk about quarterback play at Illinois. How have they gotten this? I mean, really, I know they.
Just in case we lost Corey, which is a possibility. Corey, come on back. I'll take that question and move it into this team could easily be 5-0. They should have defeated Indiana.
Yeah.
And now they go to Wisconsin. Of course, a number of people are going to discount that win as Wisconsin is really down this year, but still they go to Camp Randall and win by 3 scores. Seems as though Brett Bielema has maintained his foundation of what he believes in terms of offensive and defensive football, but learned a lot at the NFL level, as he has mentioned. And, what's your overall take before we get down to more details on this Illinois football revival of sorts?
Yeah, things are definitely moving in the right direction. There's a lot of optimism around the program and just a lot of excitement around the fan base about what Coach B has done with the Illini over the last 2 years. And really what's been impressive to me, guys, is obviously the transition and the improvement of the defense over the last 2 years under Lovie Smith. It was one of the worst defenses in college football for his entire tenure, but Ryan Walters, the defensive coordinator, has done an incredible job leading that group to being now probably on the same level as Iowa. I think they're a top 5 overall defense in the country. They're number 1 in the country in scoring defense. They're top 10, I know, in both rushing and pass efficiency defense. So they've been tearing it up this year, really picked up where they were last year. And on the offensive side of the ball, they have energy, something they didn't have last year. With Tony Peterson being the offensive coordinator last year, Barry Lunny comes in from UTSA, and it's kind of a modern offense in the way things kind of work, but it still has some traditional traits to it with the ideas of running the ball, like Brett Bielema has obviously believed in from his success at Wisconsin and his success at Arkansas. But there's now modern twist to it with the passing game. It's higher tempo. It's hitting in the passing game with slants, outs, screen passes. All those things have contributed to Tommy DeVito having a lot of success early this season.
Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
I was just going to say along those same lines about the defense, Alec, the result and the performance that really woke me up to this Illinois team this year was the Virginia game, because they played them last year, and Brennan Armstrong's a top-notch 10 or 15 quarterback in the country, and he just torched them last year. 5 touchdowns, 400 yards. And I didn't see much of the game, and then I went back and watched highlights and dug into it a little bit when I saw 24-3. How does anybody hold Virginia to 3 points? They've got like 3 legitimate NFL receivers and Armstrong at quarterback, and then I was like, wow, they're doing this now every week, regardless of the level of opponent.
Yeah, and it really starts at the defensive line for them. And the way that Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph have played on the defensive line for them really all season has been really impressive. I believe Johnny Newton leads the entire country in pressures for a defensive lineman. I believe that's according to PFF. I think Keith Randolph's also in the top 10 in that category. But then Calvin Avery, a former 4-star prospect down from Texas, has really kind of stepped into this role as a run stuffer for them in the middle of the defensive line, and that's been huge. And then on the outside, Seth Coleman, another 4-star prospect, has kind of turned into a pretty solid player at outside linebacker. They did lose their first starting outside linebacker this season at the buck position. That's like their heavier, more traditional like pass rushing position. It's kind of a lot like a defensive end. Ezekiel Holmes, he suffered a knee injury that'll keep him out for the rest of the year. But a true freshman, Gabe Hawkeyes, has come in and he's contributed well for them to start the year. And he's someone they kind of won over Tennessee at signing day last year. So that was a big win. But the back half of the defense has been great. I think there's probably 3 NFL players in the secondary when you look at what Devin Witherspoon does at cornerback. Sidney Brown's really good at safety. And then Quan Martin in their star role, it's essentially just a nickelback, has been really, really impressive this year as well. And at free safety, they have Kendall Smith. He has 3 or 4 interceptions this year. Obviously, Kirby Joseph played that position last year and had 5 picks and ended up being a 3rd-round pick. I don't know if Kendall Smith has that type of ceiling as a player, but the defense's top line has been really impressive this year, especially at the defensive line and in the secondary.
Why can't they get people in seats?
It's a really good question. And I think the biggest answer to that is it's a fan base that is so beat down over the last 20 years. In my life, I was born in 1999. Illinois, I believe, has had 2 years maybe of a winning Big Ten record. And one of those came in 2001. The other came in 2007. And that might be the last time they had a winning Big Ten record. And when you look at the struggles they had in the 2010s with Tim Beckman, obviously Lovie Smith wasn't like an awesome hire. He invigorated energy and brought credibility to the program, something that it really needed after Tim Beckman was fired for player abuse allegations. But it's a fan base that's incredibly beat down. It's been tormented with embarrassing losses for an entire decade. And it's hard to buy into that year over year. So I think that has a lot to do with it. Now this weekend, they're really trying everything they can to get as many people inside Memorial Stadium. I know today I saw on social media that generous donors had bought enough tickets for 1,000 students to get free tickets. They're trying to give out rally towels. It being a 6:30 o'clock kickoff at night, I think there might be, 45, 50,000 people in there, especially coming off of a big win at Wisconsin.
Because comparing with Mark earlier is comparing Illinois to Rutgers, because a couple of weeks ago, Iowa played Rutgers and Rutgers sold out.
Yeah.
But you're right. Rutgers has had more success in the last 2 decades, I would like to think, than Illinois in their previous respective conference. So I just, as soon as I saw the score of the Wisconsin-Illinois game this past Saturday, I thought, well, that game's going to be sold out. And then when I saw a tweet yesterday that there were like 20,000 tickets still available, I'm thinking, holy cow. Does that stadium hold more than 60,000?
I think it holds right about at 60,000 now. I'd have to go double check on the capacity numbers there. Wow. I know in the past, before they renovated the west side, where they put in all those luxury boxes and renovated the press box area and everything for people like us, it held closer to like 80 or 90, I want to say. But yeah, the attendance has been a big issue for them. And it's kind of trickled into this being like the whole mission of the athletic department and Josh Whitman this year, the athletic director, to try and get as many butts in the seats at Memorial Stadium, because as you guys know with Iowa, right? Like, you fill your football stadium, there's a lot of money that comes into your athletic department on a week over week basis. And it helps you distribute those dollars to other athletic funds and areas that need money. And it allows you to reinvest it back into the football program, which only leads to more success.
I'll be interested to see if Iowa can run the ball. I mean, I've never seen anybody hold Wisconsin to 2 rushing yards. And I get that's accounting sacks, but it's not like they sacked him a dozen times. I mean, that was what happened with Braylon Allen in that game, because I never got a chance to watch that game because we were on the post-game show for Iowa. It actually happened with Braylon in that game.
Yeah, so I wasn't able to watch a ton of it because Kansas State was actually playing Texas Tech at the same time. But I do know that Keith Randolph and Johnny Newton both played really well on the defensive line. And I know Calvin Avery has been very good for much of this season as well at the defensive line. And then their linebackers had a pretty good game as well. Their linebackers, Tariq Barnes, CJ Hart, and Isaac Darkangelo, the 3 of them haven't had, like a headlining game where they've been super, super impressive and racked up a whole bunch of really impressive numbers, but they've been kind of solid throughout. I've been really impressed with Tariq Barnes throughout his entire career as a blitzer and as a run stuffer. So he's kind of maintained that same level of production, but really it all starts with the defensive line. The push that Keith Randolph and Johnny Newton get is incredible off the edge. And Calvin Avery, someone who weighs around 360 pounds right at the middle, and you struggle to run through that, right? And I think I highlighted before the game for people that my biggest key for Illinois getting a win was going to be their ability to stop the run. And they did that. And I didn't think they'd win by the score and the margin that they did if they stopped the run, but they did. So it was obviously a pretty impressive outing.
I'm just curious your perspective. I know you weren't alive, and neither was I when Brett Bielema was at Iowa. But I'm just curious. Do you? What's your hunch? If Iowa, if Kirk Ferentz retired tomorrow, would Brett Bielema be willing to jump ship from one Big Ten school to the next and go to Iowa?
You know, it's really funny you asked that. I have a really, really good friend from school. He's still in school. He's a senior at Illinois now. And our favorite thing to talk about in the world is college football coaching carousel. We discovered this last year. We would talk for hours about this last year after LSU fired Ed Orgeron, and then a few other jobs came up, and we were always trying to find the right spots. And Wisconsin fires Paul Chryst, which we kind of had a hunch, right? Like this could be coming. I'm sure you guys had the same thing. We didn't think it would happen this way. And I said to him, I was like, does Wisconsin call? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think he goes back there. I think those bridges are probably burnt. Iowa's another interesting one, right? Like, I think he's really happy at Illinois. I think that it's the state he's from. He's started to build it. And I also think he takes a lot of pride in this idea of this being his career defining job. Because I think people are always going to look at the Wisconsin thing and say he inherited what Barry Alvarez had made into what we all know Wisconsin as today. And then he obviously goes to Arkansas and struggles. If he comes to Illinois and turns in Illinois into a model similar to that of Wisconsin or Iowa, which is what they really, really want to be, Brett Bielema is going to have a statue. Brett Bielema is going to have a street named after him somewhere in Champaign, because Illinois fans haven't had someone like that literally ever. And would he leave for Iowa? Maybe. I don't know. That's hard to project. I guess a better question for you guys is to follow up. Like, do you think Kirk Ferentz is considering retirement? Because from the outside, like, I don't get that sense at all. Now, maybe it's one of those things where you either make a move at your offensive coordinator position or you leave. So maybe that's how Iowa does it. I don't really know, but do you see him leaving soon?
No. He just signed in 29. I don't think most Iowa fans want Kirk Ferentz to leave right now, but some do. But you're right. I mean, the logical move is for the administration to tell Kirk, you got to make a change at OC. So it's more of a theoretical question. I mean, our hypothetical question. I do think Brett would. Now, you covered Illinois under Brett Bielema. I do think he would leave. Based on what I know about Brett, but I could also be wrong. And I don't know, like the support, I think fan support. Mark, would you agree fan support is the major thing that separates these two programs? Illinois has a hotbed for recruiting if they can tap into it. I mean, they're in a great spot, but I just don't know fan support wise. Maybe he'll build them back into something, and they've traditionally been a basketball school. But I think Iowa's, without question, because of that, is a better job. But everywhere else, as far as recruiting base and, I mean, everything else, I would say facilities-wise, I think most Big Ten schools have caught up to the norm and it relates to recruiting or to facilities. Mark, would you agree with that those schools are relatively close, with the exception being the fan support?
Well, I would think that most coaches would want to believe that what they're accomplishing on the field matters, that people care, that people are invested and enthused about it. And the energy that you have to get from walking into 70,000 Rabbit fans at Kinnick Stadium versus 38,000 fans at Illinois, who many are there. We're seeing an example of it right now. Even if they get close to filling that stadium, they were doing everything possible to conjure up people and beg them to come in. So that doesn't even measure the disparity between the two. And I have to think that even though there are a lot of guidelines that have to be placed on facility upgrades, and I'm sure the conference is certainly holding universities to certain standards, that a place like Iowa has much more incentive to pump into their football program because of the numbers that are demanding that and expecting that and celebrating that versus at a place like Illinois.
Yeah, so I think it's an intriguing conversation. But as it relates to this game, Alec, let's not forget that Illinois probably, I mean, I shouldn't say probably should have won, but like these last two seasons in this matchup, have been very much in doubt for Iowa. 2 years ago, Iowa was struggling mightily on offense, and Spencer Petras actually had one of his better halves of his career in the second half in Champaign. If we're talking about just singular halves where he actually played well. And then in 2021, if it wasn't for a Charlie Jones kickoff return for a touchdown, they probably lose at Kinnick. I hate to say that, but the offense is not equipped, as we found out Saturday, to make a big comeback. And they were down, I think, 10 in that game at home.
I was just trying to rack my brain to remember whether that statement's ever been uttered on this show that Iowa was struggling mightily on offense.
I thought you were going to bring up the fact. I thought you were going to bring up the fact that I'm highlighting the best half of Petras' career. Well, I mean,
highlighting that Charlie Jones, who no longer is on the Iowa roster,
right?
Was the guy that was making the big play.
I mean, I think a lot of Iowa fans are going to be equating this game to Rutgers from 2 weeks ago, or Maryland from last year, where the inferior team has some wins early in the season, but hasn't really been tested yet. But, Illinois has been tested. I don't think Wisconsin's the Walking Dead. I mean, I still think personnel-wise, what they did in Madison is nothing compared to, or what Rutgers has done so far this year in their wins is nothing compared to just this one win that Illinois had this past week. And let's not forget, Illinois dominated Wyoming. They dominated Chattanooga. They should have beaten Indiana. I mean, they should be undefeated right now. They should be 5-1, or excuse me, 5-0, right? They're 4-1 right now.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, they should be undefeated.
I haven't made my pick yet. The line has moved to 4. Is that right, Mark?
That's what I'm seeing.
Okay.
I'm seeing that Memorial Stadium at the University of Illinois was as high a capacity as 71,000 in the late 1990s, 2001, and then they've kind of knocked it down ever since. So now it's at 60,000 plus, 6670.
I will say this about, I like what you kind of said there about Illinois having not really played anyone, because I do kind of agree with it, because their non-conference, while Wyoming has proven to be like good at the group of 5, it's a Wyoming. It's a program that you should handle, right? It's a Big Ten team.
And they had problems in the offseason. They had some off-field, they had some coaching issues.
They had a ton of transfers.
Transfer portal issues, yeah.
I think they had more kids. I want to say it was like 30, and that could be wrong. They had a huge number of kids transfer out and go to different schools because they've had a lot of success here recently, what Wyoming has. And then they handled their business against Chattanooga. Obviously, like we said, that's an FCS school. You should. But the loss to Indiana was only dominated that game really the entire time, but they turned it over 4 or 5 times. They had 1 or 2 calls go Indiana's favor. One of them took a touchdown off the board, and it would have ended up leading to Illinois winning that game. And I'm never someone who likes to blame the officials. And if you're letting the officials have an influence over the outcome of the game, like, that's a problem in the first place, especially when you dominated that game like Illinois did. But I agree with what you said there about Wisconsin, not being the Walking Dead. Like, they're still Wisconsin. You know what I mean? Wisconsin's not a program that I don't think Wisconsin's going to go win 3-4 games this entire season. I don't think you guys think that either. I mean, they're a program that's floor is so high because they don't tend to beat themselves. They don't tend to lose games because of mistakes and mental errors that lead to coverage bust or tons of turnovers and interceptions. And yeah, Graham Mertz has been bad or not up to the level that Wisconsin has always hoped that he would be again this season. But I think Wisconsin's a team that probably still ends up going to a bowl game at the end of the day. And yeah, Illinois hasn't made any huge statements in terms of opponents that they've beaten, but the way they handled this going up to Camp Randall and winning is a major statement, because nobody goes to Camp Randall and wins. I believe they had only had 2 losses against Big Ten West teams at Camp Randall since the divisions moved to the East-West model before last week. So now it's up to 3, and that could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. So like, that's a major statement. And you say that it's -4 now. Did it open at 3, guys, or did it open at 3.5?
It's at 3, I believe. So
it essentially opened as a pick'em because the home team gets 3 points. Illinois, people love to bet on Illinois this year. The Wisconsin game moved majorly in Illinois' favor. The Wyoming game moved hugely in their favor. So did the Indiana game. And I know the Chattanooga game was a weird game to bet on, but the Virginia game moved in their favor big time after losing the way they did against Indiana the week before. So, and I've started to pay a little bit more attention to this betting stuff, and I don't gamble, but it's important to follow and keep up with. But bettors love Illinois this year for whatever.
Well, they've covered every week, haven't they? Besides the Indiana week,
I think so, yeah. And they've covered like handily in most of these games because they smoked Virginia.
Yeah. So I don't know, Mark. Is this going to be on our probably not going to be on our docket of picks for the week?
Oh, we'll see. So, Alec, we've got a 12 pack that we pick among a number of media members, and I'm the guy that selects the 12. So I don't know. That's a great question. I got to work on that. I have 2 questions for Alec before we let him go. Certainly, Corey, keep going if you've got anything else.
No, I'm go ahead, Mark.
So these are not completely related to this game, but because of your known area of reporting coverage there, and then also because of what you unveiled about your interest in the coaching carousel, and with this unprecedented 5 coaches fired in the first 5 weeks of the season, I would love for somebody to uncover when that's ever happened. We used to never see any coaches fired unless there was some kind of scandal mid-season. So anyway, I'm about to post a video where I've listed 10 coaches that could be next. So who would be your favorite in regards to hot seat status?
Brian Harsin is going to get fired at Auburn at some point. And here's the thing with the Auburn job too. One, they shouldn't have hired him because he doesn't fit what they need stylistically in that conference and in that division specifically. But 2, now the way that Auburn's played for a year and a half under him, the way they've played on the field warrants him being fired regardless. So it's not just being fired for the failure in recruiting, but it's being fired for the way they played on the field. That does not excuse what I think Auburn did to him in the offseason. That was terrible. That investigation where a whole bunch of stuff was essentially made up and not true. That was awful and terrible. The Colorado job being open, that's not a job that I would find attractive personally. I feel like that's a terrible place to go and recruit to. Let's see what other jobs can we see come open here.
Northwestern?
Yeah, I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
But they got to be a little like on edge, right? They got to be like, ooh, like it's uncomfortable there. It's like it's uncomfortable.
Very much so.
Mike Norvell at Florida State. They had a good start to the year, but if it does not end well, I could see that being a move that is made potentially. And there's a certain coach at an HBCU that I think would kill it in Tallahassee, as of course we're talking about Deion Sanders. I think the Mizzou job is an interesting one to follow, to be honest with you guys. I know Drink has recruited really well there, but Drinkwitz has also got a team now that I think could potentially go winless in the SEC after they lost to Auburn the way they did. I think they're worse than South Carolina. I don't think they're much better than Vanderbilt, and Clark Lee seems to be doing a somewhat better job there. I know they had a good start to the year, and now they kind of look like Vandy again now that SEC play has started. But I think the Mizzou job's an interesting one to follow a bit. I don't know if Mizzou would make that move, but I wouldn't be shocked if they did.
Then, Alec, my last question would go in line with what you're working on right now. So I don't want to ask a question that pins you down to something you're not following, but you are a recruiting guy there at Rivals. So based on whatever your coverage area, who are the guys out there that are targets that there's any kind of recent narrative or storyline on that we could expect maybe some commits coming here in the next few weeks to any teams in the Big Ten in particular, but the Big 12, because I know that is your coverage area.
Yeah, so I'm still getting my footing on the recruiting side of things, especially as I've only been doing this new job for about a month. I've been only covering Kansas State since August 1st or September 1st. I guess that's right, September 1. So not super plugged in on the recruiting side of things yet. I'll give a little tidbit on the Iowa side. I do like what they've done. What's that 5-star offensive lineman's name?
Proctor.
Yeah, he's really good. I've had to watch a good amount of his film lately for things, and he is now an All-American, right? Is he the Under Armour All-American
Yes.
game?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. That kid's amazing. That was a hell of a win for them on the recruiting trail. And then obviously Xavier, how do you say his last name? I don't want to butcher it. Good as well. And I don't know how much he's been playing this year for them, but
they're burning his red shirt as a gunner.
That's really silly. I mean, I feel like they've had a lot of special teams players go through there. I wouldn't want to waste a red shirt on that, but considering all the success Iowa has had with defensive backs over the last 20 years, I don't know if wasting a red shirt is going to be that big of a deal, because that is the most talented defensive back that they have had in a really long time.
I've been saying this for a while. I know that we're going past our mark here, Alec, but I've been saying this for several weeks now, that they've struggled with health at wide receiver. He was a darn good wide receiver at Southeast Polk as well. It wouldn't hurt to have a few plays in the playbook for him on a go route, or even as a decoy, send him in on offense. Because, I don't think wasting his red shirt on as a gunner I don't think he's going to be there 5 years, so it probably doesn't matter. But, man, if you're going to use the red shirt up, you might as well see what you can do and get creative. But Iowa's not what we'd think of as a real creative offense, Alec. So,
and I guess I do have a question for you guys, and this kind of relates a little bit to the Wisconsin job, as you guys are still in the Big Ten circle of things and talking to more Big Ten people than I am. But do you think that Iowa and Wisconsin kind of need to modernize just a little bit to be successful under the model that they have? I think Wisconsin is obviously an open job, and I think in a perfect world, Jim Leonhard, right, wins 5-6 games to end of the year. Even 3-4 games 4 games, 5 games might be enough to allow him to keep that job next year. But do you think that those schools need to tinker with their offensive style just a little bit to find success on a national level as the Big Ten moves away from divisions? Because by all indications, that's going to be happening, if not next year in 2024, when USC and UCLA join, to still find success in football and this new modern era where offenses kind of dominate everything.
I'll go first on this, and maybe Mark can speak to Wisconsin. I mean, Iowa's got to do so much right now. You don't get to where they're at offensively without needing, an overhaul. So, I mean, I think the word modernize, sometimes people, when they hear that, they think, Iowa's going to go spread. No, that's not what we mean at all.
They don't need to do that.
No. But I mean, honestly, Mark, again, you're a better authority as it relates to Wisconsin than I am, but Wisconsin has won a whole lot of games, and more games than Iowa has, and more divisions than Iowa has, and been competitive in bigger games than Iowa has, with similar style. I mean, they run their primarily a gap scheme in the run game, but behind these ridiculously physical and talented backs and insane offensive lines, I think that can survive in this day and age. But you can't survive with average offensive lines and average running backs, which is what Iowa has had. So yes, unless Iowa can find a way to recruit consistently better or develop even better, even though they've done well developing individuals on the offensive line. And I am encouraged by the way Iowa's recruited. We're talking about recruited at running back. They've got a couple talented guys in there who are freshmen this year, and they had Kendrick Raphael, who was committed, impressive 4-star from Florida, who's now decommitted. So I do think Iowa needs to modernize. I just don't know exactly to what extent. Mark?
Alec, the term that you used in there that completely changes my answer is national. To compete on a national level, yes. To continue to operate at the level that they have, meaning Iowa and Wisconsin for the last 10 to 20 years, I believe that because they're still major brands with certain cachet, that they're going to be able to draw reasonably high recruiting classes. And then if they can stay with the formula that they've built, which is, again, to Corey's point, Wisconsin's done it so much more successfully with the great running back line that they've brought through like a conveyor belt for the last 25 to 30 years, plus the offensive lines, that they could still churn out 8-4, 9-3 teams on a consistent basis in this division against the likes of the competition that they play every week. But unlike when Maryland and Rutgers were added to the conference 10 years ago, 2 other schools are being added to the conference that, especially one of them, is serious. And the other one has the potential. I've always thought UCLA was a sleeping giant. And if those 2 get added in such a way, whether we're looking at divisions or pods, Maryland and Rutgers just turned out to be two more teams that the teams in the East, and then on a rotational basis, the teams in the West could beat on and get extra wins. But now you're adding two teams from the West that are going to, if things don't change in Iowa and Wisconsin, are going to most likely beat them down further down the ranks of the Big Ten. So yes, they're going to have to upgrade.
And it does make it. Let me just add one more thing, Alec. It does make a difference too when we're talking about style of play. Like who you have. I don't care what brand of football you're talking. Who's playing quarterback has a big role in this, right? So, like, I mean, I think Wisconsin is absolutely, whether we're talking about the Paul Chryst era or now the post-Paul Chryst era, has shown the willingness to evolve. And whether we're talking scheme or personnel, you know, they are credited. I know we're going a ways back. They're credited with grabbing Russell Wilson from what, NC State.
Yeah.
And let's not forget they made a hard push for Caleb Williams in the offseason.
So,
I mean, but you know what? If I'm a Wisconsin fan, I'm thinking, attaboy, Barry, let's keep this going, because they right now you have more faith in where they're headed. I think from you're talking about a modernization standpoint than where Iowa is on offense.
Yeah, my thing with Wisconsin and Iowa to a point, and I don't want to comment too much on Iowa because I don't like to speculate on people losing their jobs or whatever, before, especially someone like Kirk Ferentz, who has essentially made himself a legend there and whatever. But I think that Wisconsin and Iowa have found something that works. Like, that is their identity. It works, stick with it. But you also kind of need to tinker with things just a little bit here and there to make sure that that still continues to work, right? Like, not everyone can go from trestle ball at Ohio State to not even a full decade later, I guess a decade later now, having the number one offense in college football undisputed because of all the talent they have at quarterback, wide receiver, and running back. Like, very few people can do that. But I think Iowa and Wisconsin have found something that works for them and can continue to work for them if you just tinker with it a little bit and modernize it just a tiny little bit in areas here or there. And I do think that Wisconsin is in a good position now where things work well for Jim Leonard. You win 4 games in the year, go to a bowl game, decide that's your guy. You want to keep him as your head coach, keep things in the organization or keep things in the family, as people like to say in college football, right? Like, he's a very highly regarded mind on the defensive side in college football. And you keep things the same offensively, but you tinker just a little bit. So you're able to, like you said, attract a more talented quarterback, though Graham Mertz was supposed to be better and it ended up not working. Attract more wide receiver talent. So your offensive output through the air is higher and more efficient and more successful, while also combining that with a really successful rushing attack and a potent offensive line like we've seen Wisconsin and Iowa have for so long. I just think the entire dynamic of college football is just really interesting right now. And if there's one like overarching thought that I have from the Wisconsin decision to move away from Paul Chryst when they did, it's that Wisconsin's not messing around with the idea of falling behind in Illinois, Minnesota, potentially Purdue in the Big Ten, not just West, but as we move forward in the Big Ten overall. And that shows like Big Ten schools might start acting like SEC schools when it comes to financial decisions, coaching decisions, all those things. And they're going to have the ability to, because they're going to have the money from the TV contract that they just signed.
And whether you want to admit it or not, you're talking about, use the term messing around. They're trying to avoid at all costs that happening. Whether you want to admit it or not, as an Iowa fan, Iowa is messing around with potentially taking a huge step back as programs like Minnesota, Illinois, even potentially Nebraska. We'll see what happens there. I mean, and you brought up the divisions going away and the additions of USC and UCLA. This is a pivotal time in the Kirk Ferentz era in Iowa football. But great stuff, Alec. Appreciate you coming on here. And Mark, you'll have to. Now we've got some connections to Kansas State and some good recruiting insight and the coaching carousel. So we'll have to have you back sometime.
Thanks, guys. I look forward to it. Hopefully you guys are able to catch a entertaining game on Saturday in Champaign, and hopefully it's an entertaining environment for whatever Iowa fans go, because it's obviously a fan base that travel as well. So hopefully it's an entertaining environment with at least 50,000 people in the stands.
Alec Bussey, lead reporter, recruiting analyst, Rivals. Thanks, Alec. Appreciate you being here.
See you guys. Thank you.
All right, and we are a bit pressed on time, but it was a really good discussion with Alec. We want to catch the super chat. Erica, thank you so much for this. It's been a while, so I have to say it. Please gently, yes, press the like button. Go Hawks. Yes, everyone. Takes a second. Please hit the like button on your way out if you have yet to do so. Yeah, Iowa, Illinois, Big Ten Network primetime game. I'm expecting a close one. I'm expecting low scoring.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I am too, but should be a good one. Should be fun, and help us all, Mark, if they lose. That's all I can say. If Iowa goes in there and you lose to Illinois, the Wolves are going to be out on a Saturday night. And judging from our last night post-game show, there will be some drinking going on, win or lose.
That's always fun to hear.
Yeah.
Whatever Wolves or otherwise are in the chat, keep in mind in 5 minutes, we're live on the Nebraska channel for our Nebraska live show with the Huskers taking on Rutgers on Friday night. Big Ten game on a Friday night. And I'll be live at 8:30 Eastern time to take your calls on the top 25 that actually makes sense and whatever else you have in the world of college football. One quick note, I just wanted to answer. Joey was defending patience with coaches, cited Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech, who didn't get it rolling for 6 years. Frank Beamer took over one of the worst programs in college football. So it's worth noting, Joey, that some of the coaches that we're looking at losing their jobs took over strong programs. Brian Harsin being one. So there's a difference there. Are we expecting this coach needing to build a program, or are we just handing him a already stable, successful program? All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here next Tuesday, 4:30 Central. Get here for Iowa Hawkeyes Live and bring a friend.